The world's largest plant has been discovered off the westernmost tip of Australia, and incidentally, it is today also the world's oldest plant. The plant is a type of seagrass which grows entirely underwater, thick on the ocean floor, and this is a single plant which has been cloning itself for approximately 4,500 years. The grass is all one plant, fully interconnected, and it spans an area of 200 square kilometers, about as big as the city of Kolkata. Not just that, the plant is also a hybrid. It has 2 complete sets of chromosomes, and this has just been discovered after DNA sequencing of this grass. So, what is going on here exactly? How is grass the world's largest plant? How is the plant cloning itself? How has it survived for 4,500 years, since before the Indus Valley, before the building of the Great Pyramid, before record keeping began and writing began among humans, and before even civilization as we define it began? To understand this, we first need to understand what grass is, the biological kind. When we think of plants, we think of an individual plant with roots and shoots and leaves. This is how weeds grow too, as individual plants. But grass is not structured like this. All grass growing together is actually one organism. To understand this visually, imagine a tree lying on its side and growing branches upwards. That's how grass grows. There is a main stem on the ground that connects all the bits of grass that grow up. If this stem is above ground, it is called a stolon. If it is underground, it's called a rhizome. This is how we're able to have mats and meadows and lawns of grass. It's not the roots that are mingling together. The whole thing is just one plant that is sprouting branches or culms above the ground from which leaves grow. Sometimes leaves grow just right there from the floor itself, as is in the case of seagrasses. Seagrasses are those that grow on the ocean floor, and they are the only flowering plants that are entirely underwater. They flower underwater and they are pollinated underwater in the water. They're usually found near the shores of nearly all continents in the world, and they provide a protective habitat for a lot of smaller animals. Seagrass is not seaweed, which is a type of algae or algae. Seaweeds grow like individual plants without even a proper root system. There are about 60 species of fully marine seagrasses, and most of them reproduce by flowering and pollinating within the water, so reproducing sexually. This plant that has been discovered in Australia now is a familiar one called the Posidonia australis. It is also commonly called Poseidon's ribbon weed, although it's not a weed, it's seagrass. It is a flowering plant and it's very, very good at carbon sequestration. Studies have shown that it is in fact 35 times more efficient at carbon sequestration and storing carbon than rainforests on land. This species is found in the waters around the southern and western coasts of Australia. The single plant of this species that the researchers discovered is in the western Australian region of Shark Bay. The Australian researchers collected multiple samples from 10 different sites and then genetically sequenced them to understand their DNA. It turned out that the DNA of all the samples that they took was identical. They soon realized that all of these different grasses that they have sampled across different geographical regions was actually the same single plant. Even some separate disconnected meadows or lawns of grass had the same DNA, indicating that they were all interconnected at some point in the past as well, even though some of it had broken off now. The plant now spans an area of 200 square kilometers. Based on how old the bay is and how well and quickly seagrasses grow in these waters, and what we already know about this particular species of seagrass, the researchers conclude that this plant is about 4,500 years old, and one single strand of this plant stretches to 180 kilometers, making it the longest and largest known plant. There are also other interesting aspects to this plant apart from its age and size. Turns out the plant does not really reproduce sexually. It does flower, but it does not fruit. It just creates new shoots that keep branching off from the rhizome and producing grass, each blade of which is genetically identical to the rest of the plant, so it is basically cloning itself. Not only is it cloning itself, the plant is a hybrid plant. It seems to be a mix of two plants which hybridized at some point in the past, and it contains two complete sets of parent chromosomes. This is called polyploidy. Humans have two sets of 23 chromosomes. We are diploids, and this occurs because one set comes from the mother and one set from the father through sexual reproduction. So half of our genome consists of one parent's chromosomes and the other half the other parents. But polyploids such as these plants carry the entire genomes of both plants. The result is sterility. So this plant cannot reproduce sexually. The plant does flower, but their fruits, which are formed only after pollination, are never observed. But if this plant is left undisturbed, it can just continue growing in size by cloning all of its chromosomes and producing new leaves and branches. Shark Bay formed about 8,500 years ago, and the area is not really nutrient rich today. It is also exposed to a lot of sunlight, and there are large temperature fluctuations in the waters here. But despite such harsh conditions, the plant has managed to survive. Not just survive, it actually thrives, and it has colonized a very large area of the seafloor, larger than a lot of cities. The seagrass meadows have actually fallen victim to marine heat waves in the past. Most notably, the really severe marine heat wave which occurred in the summer of 2010-2011 in this region. Widespread damage was reported to the species back then, but now the seagrass seems to be recovering. This is a great yet confusing sign. Sexual reproduction is what maintains a healthy gene pool and increases genetic diversity because naturally partners have different genetics. Conversely, it is typically harder for organisms with lower genetic diversity to survive and thrive. One threat can wipe them out entirely. But here, the exact opposite seems to be occurring. The plant is actually very hardy and resilient and is able to withstand a lot of fluctuations in its ambient conditions, and it has been doing so for over 4,000 years. It turns out that the plant has genes that are so well suited to its local, constantly fluctuating environment that sexual reproduction is no longer needed for this individual plant to survive. The polyploidy here offers an advantage and causes localized minor genetic changes that are not really passed down to offspring or new branches and new leaves as a part of the cloning process. But these genetic changes help the plant survive in hyperlocal conditions and fluctuations in those regions. This is so far good news because seagrass is very important to life and the oceans. It protects our coasts from damage by storms and tsunamis and cyclones. It provides a habitat for diverse creatures just like coral reefs do. It is excellent for carbon sequestration, and it supports a large number of marine animals that feed on seagrass. Conserving and preserving seagrass meadows is extremely important in our efforts to mitigate the extreme effects of climate change. But despite this individual plant's history, seagrasses are not immune to the effects of climate change. All the resilience that this plant has shown so far has been towards naturally occurring fluctuations in its marine environment. But we know that today our marine temperatures are rising at a very drastic pace, faster than they ever have in the past. So now it's even more important to ensure that organisms like this plant are preserved and saved in an effort for us to help our own planet.